Hello there friends, welcome back to another episode of Generation Tech. My name is Alan. The Star Wars galaxy in size is quite comparable to our own. It's about 120,000 light years across compared to the Milky Way's 100,000 light years. And inside of that galaxy there are over 400 billion stars organized into 100 billion star systems with, get this, 3.2 billion of those star systems being habitable. That's equal to about 1.7% of all star systems that can support life of some kind. Now, obviously, in Star Wars, you have very advanced species with technology, terraforming capabilities that allow people to live on planets that we would definitely struggle to colonize. Bespin, for instance, has Cloud City, which floats in an upper layer of the gas giant's atmosphere, thanks to gigantic repulsor lifts. You also have signs of massive terraforming projects like Kashyyyk, whose trees and jungles can reach as high into the sky as Coruscant's layers can go beneath the ground. Then there are planets of fire, like Mustafar, and planets of water, like Kamino, where species had to evolve and adapt to the environments they lived in, either through natural means or artificial. The more planets you research and understand in this galaxy, the easier it becomes to predict how galactic history will unfold and where opportunities will arise. And one of the most important statistics you need to be aware of is where the populations are concentrated. Today, we're going to be taking a look at the 10 most populated planets in the Outer Rim. The Outer Rim has long been considered a lawless, underdeveloped, barbaric part of the galaxy, but that is a gross generalization. The planets on this list all have long histories, sophisticated cultures, economic and political systems, and most of them have played a huge role in shaping galactic history. The world of Korriban, also known as Morbrand, was the original homeworld of the Sith species, not to be confused with the Sith Order that came a bit later. Thousands of years before the Battle of Yavin, a schism occurred within the Jedi Order, and a group of dark side Force users would be driven from the Order and the core regions of the galaxy. They were more or less forgotten by the rest of society. These exiles would roam the Outer Rim until they stumbled upon the world of Korriban and found the Sith species, who were naturally aligned to the dark side. When the primitive Sith saw these dark Jedi with their advanced technology and enhanced Force powers, they worshipped them like gods. At one point, these dark Jedi would absorb the Sith name and culture, and eventually they would create their own political and spiritual ideology that was the complete opposite of the Jedi Order and Jedi Code. The Sith would eventually create a great empire in the peripherals of the galaxy, out of sight and out of mind of the Republic. At its height, Korriban, as the capital of the Sith Empire, had a population of 9.6 billion inhabitants. The Sith Empire would spread to many of the neighboring sectors and planets. But then around a millennia later, the Sith would carry out a great invasion of Republic space known as the Great Hyperspace War. Their attempt to destroy the Jedi would ultimately fail. Their forces would be routed at Coruscant, and the Old Republic would launch a huge counter-invasion that would eventually besiege Korriban and its many satellite colonies. The Jedi would personally lead the charge against the Sith and eradicate any signs of their civilization. Some historians call this one of the greatest genocides and massacres carried out by the Republic and their Jedi allies. And one could say that much of the Jedi's fear and hatred of the Sith were rooted in this one singular conflict. Before the Sith Empire, before even the Galactic Republic existed, there was a species known as the Rakata, a brutal and savage race of warriors who were relatively primitive. Their ambition as a species was kept in check by their inability to cooperate with one another. Their homeworld of Lichon, or Rakata Prime as it would be known, would be visited by an advanced species known as the Kwa, who traveled across the galaxy bringing teachings of the Force and their advanced technology to lift other species up to the galactic community. The Kwa made a deadly mistake by landing on Lichon and misjudging the local inhabitants' intentions. The Rakata would take the Kwa's teachings and technology and start a brutal military campaign, first against neighboring planets and then finally spreading out to much of the core regions of the galaxy. The Rakatans would create the Infinite Empire and enslave every species they ran across. If you take a look at the core regions of the galaxy, you'll find that most planets have at least 2 or 3 indigenous species, and it might be confusing why you'll see, species like the Twi'leks call multiple planets their home world. Well, these are most likely the descendants of the original slave population that the Rakatans distributed all across the galaxy to their various holdings. At the height of the Infinite Empire's power, Lehon had over 11 billion inhabitants. But like all empires, Rakata's power would eventually wane. Their species would be affected by a plague that would actually cut them off from the Force and therefore make much of their technology useless, including their communication devices and also their hyperdrive equipped ships. Within a few generations, the Rakatans would revert back to their primitive state. Before the Republic tried to boost capital investment in the Outer Rim with the Free Trade Zone, the corporate sector was established as a special economic zone in the far reaches of the Outer Rim, where favorable conditions and regulations attracted all types of business interests. The most important planet in this area was Bonadin. It was the chief port of the entire corporate sector and had 10 different spaceports that anchored the Hydean Way. The planet itself was completely strip-mined and polluted. Like on Coruscant, the weather was artificially controlled but mainly used to break up massive clouds of pollution in the sky. In total, this industrial corporate hellscape had 12 billion inhabitants living on it. The air is thick with pollution and toxins, both man-made and natural. The earth and soil is black, freshly grounded up lava flow brought to the surface by the shifts in pressure and rapid movements of the tectonic plates. The rivers here run superheated and are glowing red. This is the planet of Solus. Millions of years ago, our planet probably looked a lot like this, but the local Solustans had the misfortune of perhaps evolving on this planet a bit too early. Their first civilizations therefore survived in pockets of clean air beneath the ground in caves, which one day expanded into massive, beautiful underground cities like Pinyum, surrounded and powered by lava rivers. The hardest worlds created either the toughest creatures or the smartest creatures, sometimes both. The Solustans had to be innovative and productive in order to survive in such a difficult environment. At their height, the population of Solus reached 18 billion. The engineering and technical skills they developed as a species would allow them to develop extremely successful corporations like Sub, which built everything from droids and weapons to actual starships. The company employed a great percentage of the planet's workforce. You'll see that many of the worlds on our list are going to be located in the Outer Rim and serve as hubs for commerce and trade in the nearby sectors. The general rule is raw resources extracted from remote worlds flowed towards the core and finished products flowed towards the exterior. Somewhere in between that, you're going to have important nodes where trade and commerce will flourish, and that is exactly what Solus was. The planet of Solus was sitting on the extremely busy Rima trade route running from the core to the Outer Rim, and intersecting with even the larger Hydean Way. As a result, every major faction in galactic history sought Solus's favor. Travel just one stop beyond Solus on the Rima trade route and you'll run into the world of Uradu. This planet was originally covered in jungles and mountains, but thanks to pioneers like the Tarkin clan, the world would soon be tamed and developed. There were actually massive deposits of Lamite ore all across the planet, which were an essential material for transparent steel manufacturing. Now, if you know the Republic and the Empire's history, you'll know that the Tarkans have done quite a lot of damage to the galaxy. But at least early on in their family's history, their dedication to security and order led to the development of a very powerful local militia on Uradu, which kept the planet extremely stable in a region plagued by bandits, pirates, and marauders. This is why eventually not only would the Rima trade route run through Uradu, so would the famous Hydean Way along with other local and sector hyperspace routes. This gave Uradu direct access to both the northern and southern hemispheres of the core region. And remember, trade routes, hyperspace lanes, they don't just appear out of nowhere. They're not, made by the gods. Well, at least most of them aren't. Most hyperspace lanes, like early wagon paths, were built out of necessity and strengthened and improved with additional beacons, relays, and anti-purgle patrols. Those things are a complete menace. Uradu's stability attracted a ton of investments from the core, and it also served as a very important trade hub for most types of materials and goods in this region, thanks to its very robust security force. In total, Uradu at its height had a population of 22 billion. The world of Mon Calamari is in an extremely remote location. It lies on its own trading spire, branching out from the Perlimian trade route, straight from Coruscant. But Mon Cala, or Dock as it was known by the locals, was far from a detour. One could argue that Mon Cala was the true end of the Perlimian trade route. The watery world was unique in that it was home to two very productive and delicious aquatic species. The Mon Calamari lived in the shallow areas of the aquatic planet's oceans and were known as engineers and artists. Their species spread all across the galaxy as brave explorers and enterprising merchants. The Mon Calamari were also known as excellent shipwrights who specialized in large space-faring vessels for both deep space exploration and also luxury cruises. Their open-mindedness and also sense of adventure meant that the Mon Calamari society also produced very significant pieces of music and performative art. Generally, outer rim planets were seen as quite backwards, culturally speaking, but Mon Calamari operas were considered a very high form of art. Palpatine loved visiting the galaxy's opera house on Coruscant to watch performances of his favorite show, Squid Lake. Now, speaking of squids, deep below the waves on the ocean floor was the second species, known as the Corans. They were also terrific shipwrights in their own way. It turns out if you can build a decent underwater structure, you can also build extremely robust starships, even if the pressure is somewhat reversed in space. The Corans also had many deep-sea mining and drilling projects, producing all sorts of minerals and ore for both domestic consumption and export. The planet was also famous for its aquatic flora and seafood, although I would argue that consuming a sentient being like a Mon Calamari or a Coran is unethical, although there were 27 billion of these delicious little fishies living in this giant bowl of soup. There are desert planets, ice planets, lava planets, and jungle planets. And honestly, most of them kind of look the same. One could also say the same about a Ecumenopolis planet or a planet-wide city. And if you take a look at Christophus from space, you'll notice the great hubs of light that you'll see on Coruscant as well that signify population centers. But that's really the only similarity. That's because this entire planet looks like blue polished marbles, or bowling balls of some sort. That's because the entire planet was covered in forests made up of turquoise crystal spires. Located a few stops from the end of the Carillion Run, this world was located right on the border of the Outer Rim and Midrim, just like Uradu and Solus. Civilization right on the edges of the wilderness. Now, Christophus would originally be ruled by a group of mercantile oligarchs who would make a ton of money on the trade routes that passed through the area. They would eventually invest that money into mining operations, which would make the world even wealthier. The Christophan oligarchy would import alien labor to the planet with a promise of work and a better life, attracting many Rhodians, humans, and Kirkodians from neighboring planets. These transient laborers would make up a huge percentage of the workforce, not all that different from the Gulf states that attract thousands of laborers from South and Southeast Asia to make up for its shortage in manpower. The population of Christophus would eventually balloon up to 35 billion people. The planet Taurus, not surprisingly, lies right on the border of the Midrim and the Outer Rim as well, but what made it far more important than the other planets that were in a similar geographical location is the fact that Taurus lay on the Hydean Light, one of the largest trade routes in the entire galaxy. Taurus was an ecumenopolis even during the Old Republic era, with the entire planet covered in either massive skyscrapers or radioactive wastelands. Like on most ecumenopolis worlds, the rich lived in towers, whereas the middle class inhabited the middle levels. Although unlike in Coruscant, the average person could still afford to have a bit of sunlight. With a population of over 60 billion inhabitants, Taurus was politically and economically very significant for the Republic. When the Mandalorian Crusaders started pillaging and raiding nearby planets, the Old Republic more or less looked the other way, until the Horde finally arrived at Taurus and started attacking the planet. The Old Republic military would respond in force and kick off a period of constant conflict that would last several centuries, during which a Sith fleet would besiege and destroy Taurus with orbital bombardment. Although a portion of the planet would be rebuilt by the wealthy, most of the planet would lay in ruins for the rest of history. There were also a few breakouts of the Rakghoul plague, another reason why this world was extremely undesirable to live on. While Nahada was the homeworld of the Hutt species, Nar Shaddaa, the planet's moon, was a far more popular destination. Much of the commerce and trade in the sprawling Hutt space was centered and rerouted through this ecumenopolis. The moon was bisected by many hyperspace lanes. Nar Shaddaa was an important hub for all sorts of criminal activity, especially the purchase and transfer of smuggled products. This was an incredibly dangerous and polluted world. The Hutt cartels mainly lived in gigantic skyscrapers that loomed over the surface of the planet, and there were plenty of different slums and shantyvilles constructed in the spaces in between. Kind of reminds me of like Mumbai. A complete lack of regulations and government structure, other than the HUD skimming off of every illicit transaction that took place on its surface, which meant that Nar Shaddaa was extremely unorganized and chaotic in its design. With a population of over 85 billion, Nar Shaddaa was known as Little Coruscant. Finally, we arrive to our most populated planet in the Outer Rim, Geonosis. At a certain point in this planet's ancient history, a comet collided with one of the moons of Geonosis, creating a massive ring of debris around the planet, gifting the planet with constant showers of meteorites. The surface of Geonosis was hot, dry, and irradiated. Not really a pleasant place to be. Located in the Arcanus sector, this planet did not receive many visitors. Although during the rise of the Outer Rim Free Trade Zone, the Trade Federation and the Techno Union would both establish business partnerships with the Geonosians, a hive mind species which was able to provide massive amounts of cheap labor. Geonosis would become the first battlefield of the Clone Wars, as much of the Separatist droid army was being manufactured on this world. But even as the Republic successfully took over the planet, they had no idea what the true size of the Geonosian populace was. Kind of like how the Harkonians and House Atreides had no idea how many Freemen actually lived on Arrakis. After the Battle of Geonosis, a victorious Republic left only a token garrison force on the planet, which they soon lost contact with. Turns out the majority of the Geonosian population lived in intricate hives beneath the ground, safe from the elements. The planet at its height had a population of roughly 100 billion inhabitants. Later on during the Imperial era, the Geonosians were contracted by the Empire to build the superstructure for the Death Star. Once they completed that project, in order to keep the project safe, the entire species was wiped out with chemical weapons, plunging the population on the planet to just a handful of individuals. So there you have it, guys. Those are the 10 most populated Outer Rim planets. You do have some outliers here and there on how they developed, but most of these planets became populated because of where they lie on the trade routes, which is a good reminder that forget about the politics, forget about the culture wars. At the core of almost any kind of development is economic development. Well, guys, I hope you enjoyed today's video. Don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification button down below so you don't miss out on the rest of our awesome content. And as usual, my name is Alan, reminding you that my allegiance is to the Republic, to democracy. I'll see you next time.